Well, hello everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. I do want to start off by saying thank you to Virgil Ricks, Abigail Irwin, and the Student team for having us. We're so honored to have this opportunity to kick off Student Spring Digital Summit. So my name is Breanne Mertz. I am a marketing doctoral candidate at Louisiana Tech University. I'll be graduating this summer and starting as an assistant professor of marketing at Stanford University. And my colleagues will now introduce themselves as well.
Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Ashley Haas. I'm a fourth year PhD graduate now, if I said that right. I just defended my dissertation on Monday, so I'm super excited to be done with that. If you're in academia, you know that's nice, big breath, I guess. But yeah, I am at Texas Tech University right now, and we'll be joining University of Portland in the fall as an assistant professor of marketing. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, and I'm Kelley Cours Anderson. I actually got my PhD with Ashley last year, so I'm an assistant professor of marketing at the College of Charleston. Super stoked to be here and share some of these early findings with you all.
Thank you, Ashley and Kelley. So my colleagues and I are so excited to be speaking with you today on a topic that we're all very passionate about. As you may have read and as Virgil introduced, this session will explore the idea of social media wellness in both research and pedagogical context. So we'll be presenting our research first and discussing also how social media wellness can be intertwined and cultivated in the classroom. We do have time allotted at the end of our presentation for time to discuss and answer questions. So please add things in the chat as we'd love to get to those. Let's go ahead and begin the presentation. Let's see. Virgil, you want to help me out on that? That comes up next, right? Okay, and I think I'll be the one clicking through. Let me just be sure I know where that little button is. Admin, you might want to help me out on this. Oh, I see it now, down at the bottom. Okay, perfect. We can go ahead and jump right in then. All right, so the title of our research is #Social Media Wellness, Exploring a Research Agenda for Healthy Social Media Consumption. As a quick just overview of the agenda here, we'll be going through everything from literature in brief to questions at the end, just so you can have an idea of how the flow will go. I do want to start off just by kind of talking about what our goals were with this paper and with this research. Essentially, we were trying to prioritize this idea of well-being of consumers in the context of social media within the marketing discipline. And so there are four main goals here that we kind of go through, and this is just kind of serves as an overview. We shed light on the issues related to social media consumption. We also introduce a conceptual definition of social media wellness. We explore consumer perceptions and experiences of social media usage through topic analysis, and we provide a research agenda for scholars to pursue. So I can't see your faces, but I would love for you guys to throw up a little hand or throw something up in the chat just related to the question of, do you spend more time on social media than you would like? Are you surprised by how much time you'll find yourself spending? Yes, a few of us raising our hands. Let me click to this next slide here. So a few stats that you may or may not be aware of. Users are spending nearly 4 hours a day on their devices, and on a little over half of the population actually has nearly 9 accounts per person. So we're seeing lots more movement related to people logging on and wanting to be on social media, and that trajectory of the amount of time spent has continued to increase. So right now, time spent on social media has increased by 38% in just the past 5 years. And on average, people are spending 2 hours and 24 minutes per day on social media per day. So what does this look like over a lifetime? What does this look like when you look at it from a more holistic viewpoint? Let's check this out. So considering the average global life expectancy being 73, if social media usage continues at the current track that it's on at its current rate, the average user is actually on track to spend nearly 6 hours of their lives on social media. So this is a lot of time, right? I think my colleagues and I found this especially surprising. And we do think that this, kind of warrants some serious consideration of how is this affecting the well-being of consumers? What does this sort of consumption do to consumers, and how does it affect their well-being? So that brings us to kind of looking into the literature a little bit, specifically in the literature outside of marketing, you can see disciplines outside of marketing typically associate social media usage with a lot of kind of negative repercussions. We see things from decreased well-being to decreased self-esteem, body dissatisfaction, increased anxiety, compromised mental health, and even depressive symptoms leading potentially to suicidal ideation. So largely negative repercussions related to the social media usage. And this isn't to say that all social media is terrible. We all use it. There's lots of good that it can do, and it's definitely very important in business. But when you look at it in the context of marketing, it doesn't really consider, as of right now, what this social media usage could do to consumers. We're more focused in the marketing discipline so far on how to best implement and emphasize strategies, increase return on investment, all these things that are important and great. But I guess we're really kind of focusing in on what does it do to the consumer and how can we maybe achieve more of a healthy consumption? What could that look like so consumers don't have kind of these negative things happen to them? So let's go into what we define here. One way that we're seeking to explore what healthy social media consumption could look like is through this idea of social media wellness. We define that as the optimum state of well-being that a consumer pursues while intentionally managing social media consumption, accessible on mobile devices and other technology, through the awareness of how such consumption affects one's mental health and priorities. So that brings us to a few research questions that we uncover here. The first being, what does social media wellness mean to consumers? The second, what is driving consumers toward the desire to achieve social media wellness? And how has the pandemic impacted this discussion? So we build upon the concept of social media wellness by investigating those following research questions. And Ashley's going to take it from here to kind of dive more into that.
Yes, thank you so much, Bree. Just really quickly, Laura, I was about to type out in the chat to answer you. We are going to submit this very soon to the Journal of Consumer Behavior, but definitely reach out to us if you want to connect before that. In terms of the method, and thank you, Bree, for passing it off, we researched within the location of where this conversation is taking place naturally, specifically on the Twitter social media platform. I saw a couple of comments on Twitter addicts, definitely Twitter addict as well, although I don't post as much. But following an exploratory observation of common topics surrounding social media wellness, specific hashtags gathered from Twitter were isolated and examined by utilizing topic analysis made available by the conventional topic model of latent derelict allocation, or LDA. You can see here the sample consisted of around 15,700 tweets collected between September 12th, 2019, and then September 12th, 2020. And then we took into consideration the pandemic because this has exacerbated this phenomenon. We all turned to social media as we were in shelter in place and made sure to, again, take that into consideration. So the LDA analysis and findings, the latent derelict allocation assigns words to individual categories. So it uses a coherence score that was run between 1 and 20 groups. The highest score was found to be at 3, which is where these 3 optimal categories were generated. And then following those category generation, we then conducted a thematic qualitative review, which led us to these 3 themes that were emerged from the data. So first, the desire for ideal priorities. Then second, the spread education for impressional youth. And then third, the reject for mental health and mindfulness. And then you can see some of the corresponding words that were in those tweets. So now that we've gone over this, we're going to go into each of those themes a little bit more into detail. So first, tweets related to the desire for ideal priorities encompass consumers' desire to shut off their phones, get off their social media, to help manage their desired lifestyle and priorities. Many desired the life offline to take precedent, whether it was riding a bike, reading a book, or using an alarm clock instead of using their phone to do that. And this includes recognizing the value of productivity as well as the familial and lifestyle goals. By communicating their need to unplug, these individuals were recognizing the cognitive dissonance that they were experiencing. So here we can see Twitter user number 1 is talking about this weekend, let's do something we need to do, take a break from social media for an hour, be refreshed and rejuvenated. Twitter user number 2 talks about going for a walk at their usual time with their dog, saw a mom and a kid in a stroller with an older child walking behind them, totally engrossed in their phones, saying here, parents, we can do better. Maybe let's get off of our devices. So moving to the next theme, consumer tweets that fell in the spread education for impressional youth theme leveraged Twitter as an outlet to foster the teaching of social media wellness. So they recognize that today's youth or digital natives are being reared in the digital world where screen time is definitely at an all-time high, and then social media and social gaming comprise the normal social environment, and many fear the long-term effects of this. So here, Twitter user number 3 is saying we've grown up at a time where technology is always around. Definitely, as Bree said, there are positive and negative impacts of this, but let's make sure to keep an eye out on our families. And then here, Twitter user number 4 talked about something very common in this theme, education on social media wellness on this platform, Twitter. So join this workshop to help parents support mental health, learn to encourage beneficial behavior and online coping strategies for that healthy and positive living. And then moving to our last theme, the Reject for Mental Health and Mindfulness. This had tweets that indicated consumers were pushing against social norms of using social media, often accessed by smartphones or our other mobile devices, as they desire mental clarity and more specifically mindfulness. So there's been a recent trend in digital minimalism, and that characterizes many of the posts as consumers work to turn off their digital technology and more prominently remove their social media accounts to allow themselves to be present in that moment. This specific theme is unique from tweets in the desire for ideal priority theme because they're more likely to seek out self-healing and then overall lifestyle of mindfulness versus specific productive and familial objectives. And we can see here, Twitter user number 5 is talking about how digital wellness and daydreaming can go together. Not necessarily being more productive in the moment, but being more mindful in the moment and letting other possibilities rise and play. And then finally, Twitter user number 6 is talking about getting off and doing a detox, not just for a few hours or an hour, but the entire day from your digital addiction. So despite growing interest to investigate the impact of consumer well-being in the digital area, as Bree said, research within the marketing discipline specifically and other consumer research is limited thus far in these topics. So following our preliminary research and then consumers driving interest, we compiled a research agenda as part of this paper for future scholarship. For the sake of time and also slide space, we did not include everything. We just have a little flavor for you to see. But future development paths include here on the left-hand side of the table, operalization, antecedents, consequences, with a corresponding research question, and then also consumer implications, societal implications, and the role of marketing in society in the education of social media wellness. So the contributions of our paper and research is this helps answer calls to explore consumers' well-being in the digital area. There are additional calls that warrant future studies to consider the impact of consumers interacting with technology on their social, emotional, psychological, and cognitive well-being. We actually just talked about this the other day. There are more calls literally popping up over the last few weeks. Our paper also helps shed light on the repercussions of social media consumption, establishes that definition of social media wellness, and then analyzes consumers' perceptions and experiences of social media usage through the topic analysis LDA. And then finally, we offer a research agenda for future studies. So now I'd just like to leave you with a couple of managerial and stakeholder implications that related back to our theme. So first, managers should encourage employees for work-life balance while setting boundaries for screen time, definitely sorely needed today. Policymakers should also consider the youth and help implement programs and trainings to educators where the goal is education when it comes to social media wellness, something that we're definitely lacking in a lot of curriculums today. And then, of course, all stakeholders need to consider the increasing consumer segment who is rejecting the normative behavior of using social media as this continues to grow. So with that, thanks for listening to me. I'm going to pass it off to Kelley that will finish us out.
Thanks, Ashley. So what I thought I'd do is what we're going to expand on a little bit is related to education. Obviously, we're here for Students Digital Summit, and so many of you are educators. So there's no surprises here. There are a ton of educational implications. And as Bree and Ashley stated, we see that there is an understanding of social media wellness that's truly impacting consumers in a wide array of ways. This also impacts businesses. Different businesses, as you can kind of see even in that second theme there, are starting to pop up and really trying to support or even change practices to meet these consumers' needs. But I want to draw our attention also to a few specific actors that are going to impact education specifically. So first, if we can click the next slide, let's talk about our students. So our students, we see this qualitatively, and I'm sure you see it in your classrooms as well, that much of their engagement in social media is truly normalized. 4 to 8 hours on a smartphone is not atypical. And we know from research, from media, from communications, from psychology, this is impacting younger generations, their social skills, their scholarship, and their health and well-being. So throw in the pandemic, and we have a pretty nasty stew at this point. So we argue there's actually an ethical imperative to educate our students to be knowledgeable consumers themselves and understand those tensions within our current marketplace. But furthermore, if we'll go to the next guy, we're training future social media marketers, eventually, hopefully, marketing leadership. So there's a significant risk of burnout for social media marketing managers in particular. They are highly engaged, spending several hours on top of their consumer usage of social media. Many times these young professionals even have greater pressures to always be on. And I even had a conversation with my students this last week, and they were expressing this before I even opened it up. They don't always have the support they need internally. And not always does the management have that understanding of their potential value even within this medium. Still, we see some lag happening in some organizations. And that brings us to our last individual here, and that's us. That's us as instructors. First, the obvious. We all know the challenge of having to constantly need to stay updated in this space. And this certainly leads to our own burnout. And for some faculty to not even want to touch teaching digital and social media. So we know that that exists. We're lucky to have support groups and have all of these great resources available to help support our curricula struggles that we have. But one thing we quickly realized is many of us, all of us have taught digital or social and plan to continue doing so. And one thing we've quickly realized is how few resources there are that support the education of our students. In other words, future social media marketers, to understand these risks, to understand social media wellness, or even really ethics, which is a growing need within this space. So there is an instructional need for more curricula and, of course, in-class engagement on this topic. So here's our call to action. And this is what we're hoping to, of course, we're working toward this as well. But this only really happens if we work as a community. So if we'll go to the next slide. So as instructors and even as publishers here, we have an opportunity to shape the next generation. So I want to leave you with this question, and I think we might have some time. So if you want, I'd love to see your contribution here in the chat as well. But how can we support each other to help educate our students, to manage their own social media usage, and to lead hopefully healthier lives, healthier careers, and our, let's face it, ever-encroaching digital environment? And that is what we have, so we can turn it over for Q&A or ideation.
Awesome.
I'm catching up to the chat, but I see Avery is.
Thank you. Yeah, there were, I know we had a few questions come in through the chat, and one was addressed about the research being published and where the paper can be found. And you just want to update on that again for any that have joined since then.
Yeah, I will answer this one. So we are submitting this. The Journal of Consumer Behavior has a special issue on the future trends in consumer behavior. That was part of the conference that we were in. So also, if you're a doctoral student, look to submitting your research there. If you would like, I think the deadline, or it opens June 1st and closes the 30th, Bree and Kelley. Is that correct?
I would need to double check on that date exactly. I know it's coming up though.
Yeah, I'm like 98% sure. So fingers crossed on that.
Amanda says, I bring wellness into every class I teach in some way. That's cool. Amanda, I'd love to hear what ways that you're doing that.
Yeah, and Avery would definitely want to see your research as well. Sorry, also catching up with the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we had a couple more questions come in. What specific social media is the most time consuming for from the student perspective that you've seen through your research?
Good question. I'll take part of that, and then Ashley and Kelley, if y'all want to jump in. I'm actually working on my dissertation now, and I'm collecting data at least from ages 18 to 40 on screen time and then social media time spent across all platforms. So I'm having respondents add in what their amounts of time are on each of the platforms, and it really is kind of a little bit all over the board. I haven't had a chance to analyze it yet. I'm still waiting on about 100 more responses for that specific data set. Have any of you looked specifically just at students? Kelley and Ash, I know we're working on that JME paper. And so that data actually might shed some light on that as well.
Yeah, I was
I
going
just-
to mention. Oh, go ahead, Ashley. You
No,
probably
you go.
know.
Yeah, I mean, so part of my dissertation, I'm looking at digital wellness holistically from the consumer perspective while they're interacting with social media influencers. And part of that, I've got 22 influencers with consumers. I think out of that sample, maybe like 10 of them are the age of college students. Honestly, it totally depended. When I spoke to these consumers, and in my classes too, we talk about social media. I've seen a lot, especially in my class, we talk a lot about TikTok, and their algorithm is like the best out there to make you get sucked in. I refuse to get on TikTok forever. And now I'm like, I understand this. But it's interesting because there were some consumers that were rejecting social media, but instead to spend all of their time on YouTube or Twitter. Like, it was really interesting because, like, although the ages showed, you know, the younger were trending more towards Instagram and TikTok, less on Facebook, there were still people maybe who, I don't know, still found a platform from them, and it really just came down to their personality. So that's kind of the trends that I'm seeing. And then in terms of their time, it's just being sucked into that wormhole, just like Abigail just said, down the rabbit hole. Kelley, I don't know if you have any other experiences or differences.
No, I was just going to layer on, and I think you guys summed it up pretty well. It really does vary. We do have data we've been collecting, and we just closed that. So TBD, we'll have some more insights on that here soon.
Awesome, thank you. Another question: What are some good ways to integrate social media wellness into the classroom? I know you all said you teach a social media course. How do you work it in, and what are some tips there?
So Kelley, I don't know if you want to go because you'll be teaching social over the summer, right? Pretty soon.
That's right. So I'm actually launching it here at CFC, our first social media specific course, and I am dedicating 2 modules. So I have usually what would normally in a normal week be a full module of content is about a week. So in a summer class, think that's a day, right? So I'll have 2 modules dedicated to both ethics and wellness, and so it covers a number of different areas. You know, in other classes, I bring it up as well, though. So many of you may not teach a digital or a social media class even, but I teach an advertising class, and we discuss it when we're talking about digital and social media because it is so important and timely right now.
Definitely. Thank you. Another question: What is the behavior of the non-social media that is different than traditional customers? Let's see if I understand that question. I know that one came through in the chat. I'm not sure if you guys understand that question a little better than I do, but yeah. So, what is the behavior of non-social media that is different than traditional sources?
Maybe if they could reword that one, I'm a little
Okay, yeah,
I'm
we
a
can.
little confused about
see if
that
we can
one,
get
but I want to answer it. So maybe just elaborate
Yeah.
on what the question was there, if that person doesn't mind.
Is there any research done on the effect of parasocial relationships and what they have on real life relationships?
I think that that's a trend that we're seeing. So it helps for me in influencer marketing. And I know that this comes heavily from the communications field. So if you're from communications, thank you for that. We appreciate that. And at least I feel like it fits very well with looking at how consumers are developing relationships online with people who they don't really know, but they have the opportunity to interact. So in my research, at least, I'm seeing that with the smaller influencers, there's not really that parasocial relationship. It develops more into a real relationship because they're actually able to engage with consumers, whether it's through DMs and the comments. They're a little bit more relatable. But definitely, I see that this applies a lot more to those maybe celebrity endorsers or more Instagram famous macro influencers, mid-tier, all of that. You know, if anyone else has anything else to add.
I would just say, it's kind of interesting. It's a good question. It's something, a good lens for us to look through as well. Something I've been working on with a student and with Ashley is this potential for spreading positivity in that same light. It doesn't always have to be a negative push. We know word of mouth tends to happen and spread quickly in social media through these parasocial relationships. But it's an interesting thought experiment too, to think about what are those positive things that can get spread and improve health and well-being.
I also see several comments about the social dilemma. That's one that I think all three of us have used in our class as a kind of discussion point, showing that trailer and then discussing with students. So if you haven't watched that, it's on Netflix. It's pretty great. It does tie into a lot of this, not completely, but in some ways, and it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'd also push the Great Hack too is another one on Netflix that looks more at political stuff. Sorry, Virgil.
Oh no, that's fine. That's great. Yeah, we love the social dilemma as well. We use that here at Stukin in a couple projects that we have in our courseware. And what was the other one you mentioned? The Great Hack. Awesome.
Yeah, the Great Hack. It's also on Netflix. So it's a little bit older. It's looking at the 2020 election and then the Cambridge Analytica,
Yep.
whatever that word is. The thing that came forward with that. Sorry, guys, blanking.
No, that's
Very
fine.
good. Another fun activity to do, and this is actually one of the main parts of my dissertation survey, where I give the respondents the directions to get to that point. But you can do it with your students as well. So have them go to their screen time, and then if their screen time's turned on, go to their last week's amount of time, go down to categories, click on social, and they can see exactly how much time they've spent on that. Some of you guys are probably, you're nodding, you're familiar. Others of you might have been like, oh, I've never looked into that. But that can be really fascinating and eye-opening and really spark wonderful conversation with students. I know in my class specifically, students were like, oh my gosh, I had no idea I was spending, this much time. And then you can go into conversations about, well, if you did set up limits for yourself, have those ever worked? Yes or no? Have you done a detox? What has that been like? And kind of bringing up some of the mental health aspects as well of how that affects especially that area. Because what we do know that research tells us, especially young girls, but adolescents, in that age category, whether it be high school or college, they are hit the hardest by some of those negative repercussions. So it's all the more applicable to our students. So definitely a great discussion to be had, and can be eye-opening from, a faculty position, teaching position, but also the students themselves.
Awesome. Thank you. A couple more questions we have. Do you think the pressure social media marketers are feeling is being pushed by managers or by the individual's desire to be great at their job?
I had a great conversation, and just kind of to add on to what Bree was saying, a lot of times students just want the opportunity to talk about this. A lot of these pressures tend to be, and I even described it to the students, is unfortunately is a little bit individualized, but some of it is systematic, because who do we hire? And I worked in industry for 15 years. So I remember us hiring these people, ready to get out from their undergrad and get started. And we know that they're going to put in their all, right? Because they're just in that right mindset. So some of it is because we're hiring these youth right? If as a marketing manager, marketing director, you're hiring youth because you know that they have the time and the desire to do it. So that is part of the issue. The other issue is there is personal internal desire to do well in their job, and they know that this is a single step to get them further along. So it's a little bit of both. I don't think it's one or the other, but I do, and this is part of where, as an instructor, hopefully we're able to coach our students on how you can manage that and how you can manage those internal expectations. I don't think social media managers should be demanded to be working all the time. They should have a life as well. And so just trying to coach them through that is a big piece of it.
Well said, Kelley. Yeah.
Another question, in addition to content consumption, have you looked into the health of social media content creators?
Yes, that's my dissertation, but not necessarily content creators. I don't call them that, but social media influencers. I would say very similar, and it's just interesting stuff. It's really hard, at least in my experience so far of what I have, to kind of like parse it out from the platform itself, because it's just such a holistic thing. It's like Kelley had just kind of mentioned, there's systematic pressure, there's pressure on the individual. We also are picking up our phones like 50 or 60 times a day. We're distracted consumers, but definitely content creators are adding to both the benefits and some of the consequences of social media wellness in general. I mean, of course, as Bree and Kelley have mentioned, there's so many positives. There are a lot of negatives, and especially with content creators, that social comparison is, I think, one of the biggest impacts. Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Here's another one. I know we touched a little bit on some of this, but what are the top 5 digital channels rank-wise for Gen Z? I'm not sure if you know that detail. I know you mentioned TikTok is pretty popular.
Yeah, I'd say TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram. What else? I'm trying to think of them kind of like
those are some of the main ones, and sometimes they do flip order depending on who the person is that did the study. But yeah, the ones that you just mentioned, those are the top. I agree.
Yeah, and maybe Reddit too, I'd say.
Yep. How do you find the balance between being a master of and not a servant of social media? What's the trick?
I think it's all about figuring out where the tipping point is for you. For personally, I'm taking a complete detox off of social media right now. And so when I started kind of noticing it encroaching on some of the themes even that we talked about in our study, with priorities and things of that sort, I had to take a step back. And I think that's kind of up to each individual. And so it's going to be something that is more personal, but I definitely think the more discussion and awareness that we can have about it will help people be able to figure out what that is for them, and shed light on that overall.
Yeah, I totally agree with Bree. I was just going to say it came down to the amount of control of the consumers that I talked to, and some were able to do what Bree did, or I did the same thing during dissertation time. I got off it totally. I've just gotten back on all my social media, and I'm like, oh my God, where's my time going? So it's setting those boundaries, which is where kind of the education comes in, I'd say, on our part and policymakers' part, kids growing up through school and all of that. But yeah, some consumers had control. They created or curated a feed of goodness coming back to them, and others were like, why am I following who I follow? Why am I spending so much time? So I think it comes down to those individual boundaries.
Definitely. Thank you.
I like Jason's question. What are good ethical debate questions that you can use in class to spark class discussion? I think we probably all have a few ideas about that. I know one that I talked about with my students was related to when it comes to social media consumption and that having a negative impact, especially on students. Is that up to parents to educate students on? Is it up to us as educators? Is it public policy? Is it up to the apps themselves? You know, should they be issuing warnings and little statements and disclaimers? And so having the students kind of take different approaches, maybe putting them into groups and giving points from each standpoint and hearing each other out. I think that could be a really cool one. Ashley and Kelley, y'all might have others. That's just one idea. But I know my students love kind of that debate and ethical back and forth, especially if you assign a group to a certain viewpoint.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for catching that one. A few more minutes, so we'll just do a few more of these questions. How do you separate out the benefits of social media, thinking of sites like LinkedIn for networking and career growth, from the negative aspects? And does your research address that topic?
I'll take that one. I don't have any of the findings yet, but I am collecting on that specifically. So one of the platforms that I look at is LinkedIn, but also in contrast, I have, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of these. And so I do plan to look at each of those platforms and to see how it affects well-being and numerous other dependent variables. And is there a certain amount of time that's actually like essentially my whole dissertation? Does the amount of time spent on social media lead to numerous negative repercussions? Is there a certain threshold that passes and then it becomes negative? Is that significant? Are there some that are worse than others for people's well-being? Like, would LinkedIn be totally fine, but TikTok have negative repercussions? So I think it'll be cool to dive into that. And yeah, that's my dissertation in a nutshell. So to be determined, I guess.
Awesome. We'll look forward to more there then, but that sounds really interesting. Another question: how do we help the current generation be more intentional, strategic, and thoughtful about their social media activity? And I know we've talked about some of that already, but just some thoughts you had on that topic.
Can you ask that question one more time, Virgil? Sorry.
Yeah. Just so, how do we help the current generation be more intentional, strategic, and thoughtful about their social media activity?
I think it all comes down to education. I mean, allowing them to not be afraid of it. I know there was a comment up at the top, we're not trying to evoke panic of any sort, but just kind of letting them see both sides. Like, it's a wonderful tool. It's great. It's obviously a non-negotiable in business. You have to have it as a marketer, and you need to have that skill set, but you also need to kind of be aware of the flip side of the impact that it can have on you and your well-being. And so figuring out how to navigate that. And again, that all just kind of comes back to that education. And then the ethical discussion of who is that ethical, or who does that discussion and awareness fall on? Who has that responsibility? I think to some extent it's us as users, but then hopefully we can kind of help pave the way for education to come into play there on that topic as well. Ashley, Kelley, did y'all have any comments on that one too? I liked that question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, many times there's a big ethical conversation around not only your own self, but also the consumers. As marketers, we should be fairly consumer centric and understanding, what can benefit them. Obviously, we have that is a big stakeholder we have to keep in mind as future marketers. So sometimes it's just, as Bree mentioned, it's understanding, but being able to understand both sides of the argument. So as Bree mentioned, that kind of ethical debate where you're kind of placing people in those, putting those different hats on them, whether they've thought about it or not, can be really beneficial to kind of stretching their understanding of what those positives and negatives are, and understanding where that gray line is and where that gray line should be. That's what's going to really drive the future of marketing and future social media marketing, and understanding where those privacy legislation should be. And that's a good opportunity of why this is beneficial in the classroom.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, I think that I equate this to when I was a kid in high school growing up, they didn't really teach us how to balance checkbooks or any of the business stuff. We had one class on Word and Excel and all that, right? And I think that in our category of the impressional youth, it's just important to understand, like Bree asked, who does this fall on? Kelley as well, who does this fall on? It's important, I think, for all stakeholders involved, but I think that in education, one of our duties is to coach individuals and tell them, make them aware. Again, the sky's not falling, but understanding, some of these negative impacts. And I saw somebody said earlier, TikTok has, if you're on it too long, nudge you to get off. Instagram said they'd be doing it. It was supposed to be in March. It's April now, so it should be coming up soon. But yeah, without those tools, though, I think it's just important for younger individuals, digital natives, Generation Z, the other ones coming up, to kind of have it transparent for them to know kind of what those positive and negatives are.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been great. I know we've had some more questions come in. We're running out of time for those, but if you have more questions for Bree or Ashley or Kelley, their emails are on screen there. You can reach out to them, and Ashley and Kelley also have their Twitter handles, so you can follow them and stay up to date on their research, and get any additional questions you have answered. And we appreciate this so much. Thank you, Bree and Ashley and Kelley, for your time and for your research.
Thanks so much, you guys.